crave something. It could be love, approval, or validation. But what happens when that craving becomes a cage? When the applause from other people drowns out the whispers of purpose in your life. When apparently everything else that you're seeking takes you all the way to the path of addiction. This is Break Free, and today we are looking at a topic we've titled From Approval to Authenticity. And this is directly dependent on a gentleman's story whose journey to lasting freedom is what we are following. His name is no other than Bert Nollenberger. How are you, sir?
Good. So glad to be here, Jose.
Glad to have you too.
Good to have you.
And thank you for opening up to share your testimony and what you went through in life.
I'm honored.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, those of you joining us and watching us on this particular platform, this episode of Breaking Free, we sit down with Bert here, who is a successful executive coach, a motivational speaker, and a former addict whose relentless quest for approval nearly destroyed him. He has written a book called Keep the Change, and he peels off layers of his history with radical transparency, showing how the 12 steps to recovery aren't just for addiction, but they're a roadmap for leadership, healing, and authentic living. I hope this particular episode is going to be a blessing for you, because right now it is time for you and I to stop performing, but to start transforming. Bert, I'd like for us to begin on a note of probably identity and brokenness. But before we go deeper into this conversation, allow me to ask first of all, you to confess your addiction and how long you have been free.
Oh boy, it's by the grace of God that I'm free. I will tell you that. 40 years ago in 14 days, as we're filming this, I walked into a rehab center weighing 150 pounds with a $5,000 a month cocaine habit, drinking every single day. At that point, when I went to work, my boss caught me, he fired me. The next day I called a treatment center, and by the grace of God was led to a treatment center. 2 weeks into that treatment center, the counselor, Gus, told me I wouldn't make it. He said I hadn't lost my car, I hadn't lost my house, I hadn't lost my daughter. He said, your bottom was too high, as they say in recovery. And at that particular time, I remember I wanted to punch him in the nose. And a day later, I was in the bathroom getting ready to talk to him again and found some cocaine in one of my shirts that I left there months earlier. And I opened it and I looked at it and then I flushed it down the toilet. And I remember saying, take that, Gus. I was so mad at him. 2 weeks later, I graduated. And by God's grace, that was 40 years ago, 14,614 days, if I do the math correctly, one day at a time. I will tell you, though, I flipped addictions. And even though I was free from drugs and alcohol, I started getting deep into sexual integrity issues, lust, and you mentioned it earlier, attention seeking. That was a big part, unfortunately, for a number of years. But one day, I walked into a church and I discovered a program called Celebrate Recovery, which is a 12-step program designed around Christian principles. And in that moment, I started to go into meetings and I started to confess to God my sin against sexual integrity issues, and it started me on the path to recovery. So not only today do I have freedom from drugs and alcohol, but I've got some freedom from sexual integrity issues too. I'm still working on other stuff, like sometimes bouts of attitude, tone, insecurity. I work on stuff every day, as all of us do, but I'm just so grateful I've got some freedom from those big giants that I was facing, thanks to God.
Great indeed. Now, before addiction became a name in your life, you were obviously, you had a deeper hunger, of wanting to be you wanted seeking attention, affection, and the like. What really were you chasing?
That's such a great question. I think, and I know, and I've had to look at it over all these years. I think a man or a woman becomes a lot more healthy when they're self-aware. And I think self-awareness, frankly, is one of the first things that has to happen with any recovery or any work, any mental health, any physical work. There's a river in Egypt called the Nile, and there's a problem within humans called denial. And it's not the river in Egypt. When you and I are in denial, that means we're not looking at our issues appropriately or going deep. I've gone deep for a number of years. Years ago, I had a mama that loved me and a dad that really was distant, not physically, but emotionally. And I always craved his attention. I wanted his attention from the get-go, and I never got it. And I think what happened at Jose is that I started to look at how do I get my dad's attention? Then after that, I started really, really liking attention from the opposite sex. So I always wanted to make sure that I looked good and that I was appropriate, that I got their attention. I wasn't even appropriately, but I was always looking for attention from females. And it became an obsession. The drugs and alcohol, I think, came from I didn't love who I was. I didn't like who I was at all. I had a lisp. I had a floppy ear. I wanted to be an athlete and I wasn't. I just didn't like me. And through those young years, I found that if I drank or flirted or lusted, it took me away from who I really was. So I could be blind to who I was in denial, and I could be anything, say anything, anytime I wanted to. And after doing that over and over again, it became an addiction. I wanted the feeling of that first drink, the feeling of getting attention, and I always strove for that. And it was never enough. And that was a journey through my whole life, that I had to realize it was never going to be enough, that he was enough, and not even more importantly, but importantly, I was enough. When I realized I was okay, then I realized that I could start working on me and I didn't have to get other people's attention.
Great. Viewers watching us right now, obviously, my name is Kondwelani Jose, and I'm here with Bat Knowlenberger, and we're talking basically his life, celebrating his life for 40 years being sober. Prior to that, he was what we call in Zambia a junkie, but though if you look at face value, you would say he was a successful motivational speaker, a successful auto salesman, and he was living his life great. But deep down, Matt, what did it feel like knowing that you were wearing a mask on face value and that you were suffocating underneath?
Man, you have good questions. I will tell you what it looked like. I didn't know what it looked like. All I knew is I didn't want to be me. So when I numbed myself, I could be anywhere, anything I wanted to be. I had a good smile, I had charisma, I had all that, but again, I didn't know who I was. And I got sober actually at a young age. And it was a traumatic experience that got me sober, and that was getting fired from a high-paying job, but weighing 150 pounds with a big-time drug addiction. And at that time, I was successful, but I wasn't, it doesn't compare to today. I was successful, I guess, in world terms as a finance manager at a car dealership. I guess that's successful, but I hid it. I didn't know Jesus, and I could say anything to anybody. I could be a chameleon. If you were this way, I could be that way. If you were this way, I could be that way. So I didn't know my true self. I remember one time I saw a t-shirt, and it said, "To your own self be true." Well, I didn't know who my own self was. And because of that, I sought everything else. I wanted to be everybody's friend. So I was very much not only insecure, I was also an addict, and I was codependent, where I would be happy if you liked me. But if you didn't like me, if you didn't think that I was okay, then I didn't like myself.
It was like you now.
Buddy, really? You know what? I can handle that today. That's all right.
Great.
You got your opinion.
So probably I take you back a little bit to that particular moment when you finally realized that, and you said it to yourself that, hey, I'm not okay. Yeah, and what broke you? And at that moment, how did God utilize that moment to begin the process of healing in your life?
So good. So my dad was a car dealer. My mom was a model. My mom was always putting on the mask, right? My dad was playing the part. My dad was an alcoholic, so I was a child of an alcoholic. And I will say to you, again, I was always trying to get his attention. My dad was never involved in any of my sporting activities, and I remember him doing his things, but I don't remember him ever getting involved in mine. So because of that, I always wanted his attention. And I made a decision when I became a parent that I was going to be doing it exactly the opposite of how he did. So a year before I got sober, my daughter Tiffany Danielle was born. And I believe every human being on the planet needs a big because. And the because is the why. If you and I know why we want what we want, and we're willing to go to any length to fulfill our why, if our why is big enough, if our because is big enough, we'll do anything. And that's what happened with Tiffany, because I had her, I was so proud of her, but when I saw the pictures, my pictures of her and I together, I was skinny, my face was drawn in. I gained 50 pounds in rehab. I was really sick at the moment in the time, but this was a year before I went into rehab. I knew that she was my because. So I was going to do anything, even though I was limited because I had to work, anything to get better. And one day when I got fired from that job, I had a tie on. I remember what happened. My boss came in and said, "You're fired." I loosened my button, I loosened my tie, and I thought to myself, now I can get some help. And when I realized I could get some help, I knew I could go to a rehab center. And that was in my everyday. I wanted to get to that place, but I didn't know how to escape that job, and I didn't know how to go to a rehab center for 30 days. But she was my why. Later on, in my recovery from sexual integrity issues, my wife, who I adore, who's my best friend, who's my partner, who's somebody I so respect, she was my why. I realized it was so disrespectful to my wife to not have her be my one and only. And I made that decision that I was going to do everything possible to get clean from that behavior so I could love her the way she deserved to be loved and protect her heart.
Thank you for opening up, Brad, because I know there are a lot of people out there who are broken and probably hiding all of this under the pretext of saying I am successful or wanting to become successful or trying to do something, but at the end of the day they are broken. And so this really, I hope, is speaking to somebody out there, and that we can see people opening up and wanting to talk about their lives or addictions per se freely. I'd like to get to your spiritual side though. Was there a time when God was silent, or maybe you were just ashamed to approach Him?
Yeah.
How did you eventually just pull through? How did you have the grace?
Oh boy, it's all grace. That's really what it is. I was raised in a Unitarian home, and if you ask me what Unitarian is, I cannot tell you. I mean, we used to go to church, have a tie on, and listen, and I'd sleep. Later on, as I became an adult, though, I look back and I say, how did Jesus and why did Jesus pull me in and introduce me to His church? And this was, again, 10 years after I was sober that I really met Jesus. I knew that God existed. I knew He was out there somewhere, but I just didn't have a relationship with Him. But I begged to a God I didn't even know for help a lot. But when I was young, I didn't have a relationship with Jesus, nor do I know who He is. But I had grandparents. and I'm sure a lot of you can relate, that prayed me into this moment we are here right now. I mean, they've been in heaven for a long time, but I know that I'm sober because of this. I know I'm sober because of their prayers. I know I've got a family because of their prayers and the grace of Jesus. The thing I'd like to point out is what really changed my life, what really changed my life, Jose, was when I started following a couple things. Number one was the steps to recovery. And we mentioned the steps to recovery not just for those who are addicts, but those who are doing life. Now, we can't go through every step, but there's 3 steps that I think are really important that will at least start us off. And you can see my passion for this. Number 1 step is we admitted we were powerless over whatever, and our life had become unmanageable. It could be powerless over other people's feelings, powerless over our anger, powerless over our gambling, powerless over alcohol, could be powerless over insecurity. Whatever it is, admit it. When you and I can have that self-awareness and then admit, boom, that changes things, right? I'll get to your question because the next one is believe. When I first got sober, I didn't know what to believe. 10 years after I was sober, Jesus took me into a Christian church into Santa Cruz, California, where I lived at the time, and I heard the pastor speak on Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And when I heard that, I thought, that's what I want. I was free from drugs and alcohol, but I was a sex addict, a flirt, a narcissist. I wanted freedom. At that moment, I found out who Jesus was, and I also found a program called Celebrate Recovery, which is a 12-step program focused on Jesus being the higher power. Today, my wife and I are ministry leaders of a Celebrate Recovery, where we meet every week. And Celebrate Recovery is worldwide. We want it in Zambia. That's our goal is for you and for the people that need help. But the second step is believing that we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves, who? Jesus Christ, could restore us to sanity. And what happened with me, but it took time, is I had to find out who this Jesus was. I had to study him. I was sometimes a hypocrite. I had to walk toward him. Sometimes I walked back, but I kept walking toward him over and over and over again, and he kept doing this, come to me, come to me. And you know why I think? Because he had a mission for me, to be here right now, to tell my story, to help one person get from that place of the pit. And we've all been in the pit to a place of peace and hope and victory. And that's where my life is today. The next one is C, commitment, or step 3, which is make a decision. When you and I decide to turn our lives over to Jesus and make a commitment, that's when everything changed for me. Yes, I've been sober, but I didn't know Jesus. When I really found Jesus, my sexual integrity issues started to fade, but I did the work, man, every day. My anger started to fade, my security as opposed to insecurity started to fade, and I started to realize what truth was and who I really was, and I started to tell the truth in all things. Changed everything.
Awesome. I like it that you're bringing in truth to that confession. But then I would ask this based off the truth, because then you believed in a lie for too long.
Yeah.
So now, how did then the truth of the Word of God break that lie and you caught up with it and ran with it in your life?
Yeah, I believe that the answer is in the book. The answer is in the Word. But I believe, too, it's sometimes hard for us to understand what Moses went through because it's another world. But the story is in the book. So the more that you and I can understand the book, the more that you and I can read the Word, the more we can understand and have people help us translate the Word. It is the Word of life. And Jesus says it's the Word of life. It's the book of life. I believe that's the foundation. The more I spend time with God every morning now, And every morning means for about an hour and a half. And we're deep in discussions. And that has allowed me to realize that God's my refuge and my strong tower. And He is in all things. So I pray ceaselessly. I pray constantly. I pray in my car. I pray when I walk. I'm holding His scarred right hand always. It's been a big part of that. And I know the answer is there. And yet, He also talks to us in Matthew about we have to pick up the mat and walk. We have to do the work. The reason there's 12 steps is we have to do the work. He's not just going to touch us with a magic wand and all of a sudden we recover. You and I get that does not happen in life. It's tough out there. My father used to say it's a jungle out there. And I used to say, well, that's not true. It's not that bad. Yes, it is. And I realized when he was actually right about that I needed Jesus more and more every minute. But Jesus needs us to be the hands and the feet. He needs you, He needs me to spread that word so that other people can have that freedom.
Mm-hmm. You were a man in leadership, and I'm sure many people out there are leaders, but they have this particular addiction and they don't want to come out of it. I know it is hard for a man in leadership, or just a man, to admit weakness.
Yeah, sure.
You know? But how did you manage, to surrender your weakness to God? And what would you say to a person out there, who's still preaching to themselves that I got this?
Yeah. Well, good luck with that, right? We are humans built in community. If you read anything about the Word, the disciples didn't go out by themselves. They were in community. We know community is a big thing. I don't know about you, but when I get a cough, if I hold it in, I'm probably in trouble. When I cough it out, it becomes a lot more freeing. There's three pieces that are really important in getting to the next side and to get into victory. Number one, the steps. We already talked about those. But there's another piece too, and that is having an accountability partner, a companion along the way that's done this before. He or she is an expert. They're the same sex as you are. It is a mentor that says, this is the way to go, and we follow those steps. I had my first sponsor was someone who told me I didn't have to drink, and that was so freeing. I also, number three, had accountability partners. And those partners, when I lied, they would call me on that. Every human being needs accountability partners to hold us accountable for our behavior. Hey, we're sinners. We slip. We make mistakes. We miss the mark. And having people around us that can help us with staying in line really is such a big, big piece of this. And yet, I also want to put this out there. Self-integrity is a huge piece. And what I mean by that is when you and I make a promise, let's say we make a promise that we're not going to drink today, and then we drink and we don't tell anybody, what happens? We get this feeling within us, this anger within us, this hate within us. And that's where anger comes from. And frankly, that's where the old behavior comes into us again. If you and I have a secret, we're going to go back to the old behavior. Slipping happens. Relapse happens. It's just the way it is sometimes. But the more we tell people, the more we're honest, the more we walk in integrity and say, I blew it, the more that we can walk back on the path, the road to recovery, and eventually we don't have to go off the road again. But we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to be honest with others. You and I, if we can't keep a promise to ourselves, we can't keep the promise to other people ever. And if we can't keep a promise to ourselves, we're liars. If I can't keep a promise to you, I'm a liar. I don't want to be a liar today. I want to walk in truth. The truth will set us free.
And I like the fact that you've brought out an issue of relapse here, because many people just think once you go through rehab and come out, then you're okay. Could you please probably spend a little bit of some time to talk about that time when you relapse, and when that does happen as an addict, you get to feel even more guilty than you were before you went to rehab. Just spend a little bit of time.
Thanks for letting me relive that. Here's what I will tell you. With drugs and alcohol, I didn't relapse. I mean, that's really weird, though, right? I was 40 years without relapsing. Why? Because my daughter I looked at every day. My daughter was that why. Every human being needs a why. We said that earlier. And yet the sexual integrity stuff, dude, it took me 20 years. 20 years of being a Christian, being a hypocritical Christian, what I call a hypochristian, saying one thing with one group of people, another with another group of people, and then being in a dark room looking at porn or acting out with flirting or not being true in marriage. I mean, it was ugly for 20 years. I was not a good man. And then what happened was, and I told you this before, my wife ended up being my reason. And when you and I have a big enough reason, we'll do anything. See, I knew how to stay sober. I knew how to work the steps. But what happened was I decided that I was going all in with God with drugs and alcohol, but I was not going all in with my sexual integrity. I wanted to keep this one a secret. I'm not going to let God know about that one. Well, of course he knew about that one. And he convicted me about that one. But the time when I had to admit to my wife that I did something unfaithful, and the time I had to admit that to her crushed me. I can't even spit it out. We separated for a short period of time. But in the middle of that separation, I was going through what's called a step study, where I was working through the steps to recovery with my sexual integrity issues. I was working through my steps to recovery with my sexual integrity issues. And we had a graduation. We had been separated, but the graduation was coming. I'd been in this step study for 10 months, going through with my brothers, all the steps to recovery. I was done. It was 3 months after we separated, and I was done. And I asked my wife to come to my graduation. And she didn't say yes, but that night at graduation, there she was. And when I looked at her, I cried, and I knew this was the start of the recovery. So let me just land this part, if I may.
Go ahead.
Grace is upon you. My story is no different than yours. I am not favored any more than you are. But what I would say is I have amazing grace. I always was a goal setter, but I never planned on what had happened to me. We're a blended family. I'm not suggesting that was my sin that caused the blended family. But what I am saying this, it was my fault. But what I am saying this is God's grace to me nonetheless. We've all made mistakes, but God's grace exists massively. Between my wife and I, we just 2 weeks ago renewed our vows, our 10-year marriage vows. And we had all of our kids there from both marriages, and all their spouses, and all of our grandkids. We had 33 people there from both of our families in this incredible blended family of 14, soon to be 15 grandkids. Now, I didn't write that on a goal sheet. It was the grace of God. And the family that God's brought us together with has been unbelievable. The reason I tell you that isn't, again, if you've got 2 kids, that doesn't mean my 32 are better than your 2. Of course not. It means you've been given grace in your life too. What I always tell my coaching clients, and I always do myself, is every day I write the 5 things I'm so grateful for. Every single day. And I try not to have the same ones every day, because it would always be God, my wife, and my kids. I try to mix it up. But that gratefulness allows me to just so embrace those things that God's given me and not be thinking, well, why didn't I have that business or that bigger house? That doesn't matter. What matters is the grace that God's given me and the path that I'm walking with God. So there's such victory at the end of this that a lot of times you and I don't even know what it's going to be, but he does. And a lot of times it's 10 times better than what we could ever imagine. I know that was for me.
Thank you for that, but just out of curiosity, what are the 5 things that you love today you're in Zambia?
Oh, man. I've never been to Zambia before. I was so touched by going in the slum and seeing the children at the school. Yes. And it was unbelievable. We walked in to the church, a bunch of us on this mission trip that came to Zambia, and these sweet, sweet souls of children were screaming because we were in the room and because we were there. It was so touching. It was the most touching day of my life, period. And to be in their presence was amazing. And then 2 hours later, being able to hand them a plate of food and have them reach for it was amazing. To hear the stories of people that were on the brink of suicide, but now they're cooking food for all these kids. Amazing. So you might say, well, what's your 5 things? Well, my 5 things do change every day. But my 5 things today are, 1, that you and I get to hang out and do this. It's touching my soul. That the people I met in church a little bit ago that came up to me and they want to work on mental health in this country touched my soul. The fact that I got to be with those kids and I got to hang out with them touched my soul. The fact that we got to meet a family where the grandmother's raising her kids and we got to pray in her house touched my soul. The fact that God's using me, whatever reason, a wretch like me, and he's taking a wretch like me to spread the news, and that I get to do a class with 90 people in it on recovery, touched my soul. So that's my 5 or 6 things that I'm super grateful for today. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing those 5. Be encouraged as well to write a list on a daily basis of things that you appreciate that God is doing in your life. But your story is that of addiction to sobriety. And obviously, I must say there's been some despair, that you were despaired and you've now moved to purpose.
Yes.
So what was God's redemption? When did God's redemption start in your life to rewrite your story?
When I went to rehab. That was the start. See, again, we talked about, I didn't know Jesus, but he knew me. And he was working on me those 10 years from the time I went to rehab sober to the time I flipped addictions to sexual integrity and narcissism and all of that, to 10 years later when he introduced me to the Christian church and he introduced me to himself, and Romans 12:2 came around, and then Celebrate Recovery. All of that, when I look back, I think, oh, that's why I went through that. So it started that morning when I was crying and asking God for help, and rehab was the result 2 hours later. It's changed everything. Did I change instantly? No. Did my prayers always get answered? Probably. But sometimes we have to go through the test before we can have a testimony. Sometimes God's no's are not yet. And God's ways are better than my ways. And it's so obvious. This experience happened because I interviewed Malinga for my podcast called Keep the Change. We went back to our church. He visited Arizona at the time. We went back to our church the next day, and a group of men said they were going to Zambia. And I said, I'll go. I never planned on it. I went home and told my sweet bride, Mary, I said, Mary, I'm going to Zambia with a men's group. And she said, where'd that come from? And I knew that I knew that I knew. And it's so evident with this experience here. It came because God said, come on, walk with me. And I was obedient to that.
Great. I don't want to hear in your response to this question you telling me God, because God sees everything.
Yes.
I want you to tell us, who was that one person that saw you broken, saw you for who you are, and still stood by you with love?
I think probably, and I think this is true with anybody who wants to, the 12th step of recovery says, once we've learned these steps, it's now our time to give it back. And I believe what happened, it had to be my first sponsor. My first sponsor, I saw him in the rehab center, and I thought, I like his story. His lifestyle was different than mine, but I wasn't looking at his lifestyle. It wasn't looking at anything about anything other than, could he help me stay sober? Because that's what I wanted at that time. And he was the one who first told me, go to a meeting every day. He was the one who said, I want you to call me every day. He's the one who said to me, I believe in you. And that never happened before. And he was also the one who said, I will be with you every step of the way through this journey. So he got me on those steps to recovery. And I did those for decades, not just 90 days. I did it for decades. But I'm going to go back to a couple other people. My grandparents, who I mentioned earlier, believed in me no matter what. And most important, my mama. My mom always believed in me. No matter how stupid I was, she believed in me. For decades, she believed in me. I remember when I walked into rehab and I called her and I said, I'm in rehab. And she said, Bart, I'm so sorry. I'm with you. I've got it. Every year in my sobriety birthday, June 15th, she would call me and say, happy birthday. My mom didn't know Jesus until, I know you said I wasn't going to bring Jesus in, but I can't help it. Get this, my mom wasn't a believer. I became a believer before she did. And we would sit around holding hands at our house, and I would say, can I pray for you? Can I tell you about Jesus? And she would always tell me, not now. Until one day, we're having lunch. She was 97 years old. And I said, can I talk about Jesus? And she didn't roll her eyes and tell me not now. She said, okay. And in that moment, we did the believer's prayer over her. A week later, Jesus took her home. So I know my mom was that one that always supported me. Anytime I try anything, she supported me and she was with me. So my mama was my angel. I talked to her every day, and she was absolutely my support. My dad, again, was distant, but my mama was there. I think we all have somebody that really was that person.
I didn't get to ask this earlier, but since you've talked about your parents there, I just wanted to get there. What was their reaction the first time they saw you high, on whether it was on alcohol or it was drugs? What was their reaction?
They laughed. I know, that sounds strange, but my parents were socialites. They'd go out every Saturday night. My dad was an alcoholic. He was a practicing alcoholic who died at 59 years old. And he died after his fourth stroke brought on by alcoholism. What happened was we wanted attention. So what I was doing, I'd see him drunk and I'd think, I want to try that because I want to be like him. And I thought maybe he would notice me. So I would tap into his liquor cabinet. One day I poured a whole bottle of vodka and a whole bottle of whiskey in 2 big goblets, chugged them both, and I walked downtown to our hometown to a student center. By the time I got to the student center, I was pretty well lit up. Everybody laughed at me. I got a lot of attention. They were laughing at me, not with me. A friend later took me home, and I stumbled in the door, and my parents were sitting on my bed. And they laughed because they thought it was funny. But they wouldn't continue to laugh because I wrecked 5 cars in high school. My dad was a car dealer, and I would go to his dealership, and he would enable me by giving me another car. Unlike a lot of people, I didn't learn life lessons necessarily from my dad. I learned what not to do from my dad. And they loved me, but they gave me things to prove their love instead of attention. The thing that happened later on in life with my mom and I, there were no things she gave me, there was time that she gave me. And that's when our relationship really got strong. But there was no doubt about it. At first they thought it was a joke until I didn't stop. And then they knew there was a problem.
Let's probably move on. Now I'd like you to speak to somebody out there who's still hiding, pretending, who's an addict to something, and the cycle continues. They say one thing today, tomorrow they're doing it. What would you say to that addict, the struggler, the one on the edge? How can they take the first step toward the freedom that only Christ can give?
That's so good. First of all, you are loved. I know it's hard to believe for the addict that just happened to be watching this, that is just waiting to either take a pill or put a needle in their arm or smoke something or drink something, because understand what's going on is you're trying to escape something. You want the feeling that we get from any of that is an escape. And it's okay. But if you and I loved each other for who we are, if we could get into a community at church, if we could have friends from church, if we could get into a recovery community where we could really talk about it, if you could have somebody like a sponsor that could walk you through it, you will find that, man, on that side is the real love. The people that are giving you the drugs, they don't love you, they just want your money. The people that are enabling your behavior, they don't love you, they don't care about you. You are loved. Jesus tells you you are loved. No matter if you were born in Arizona or Zambia, we're loved equally. And what I believe is my mission, which will never happen, is to help everybody on this planet get the feeling of what it means to not have to drink anymore. See, I'm an outlier. I went 40 years going into parties, and I was the only one in most times that didn't drink. I get how hard it is. But my quality of life is unbelievable because of the fact I don't have to do that anymore. So I would say to you, you don't have to get high anymore. It's hard for 30 days, 40 days while you're detoxing or whatever. It's hard. But when you get through the storm, it's like walking through a wall. When you get to the other side and you have people around you that support you, it's possible. You are free. You are powerful. You are loved. You are delivered. And yet, you have to admit, you have to believe in Jesus. You have to decide to give your life to Jesus. And you have to open yourself up and be real with somebody about really what's going on. The more you can be real, the more you'll heal.
Great. In your statement, you did mention to say that a week after you led your mom to Christ, she passed on. There's somebody that is on a chair watching us right now. What would you say to them if today, on this program, Breaking Free, and they are still an addict, what would you say to them if today was the last day they were going to hear the gospel? What are you telling them now?
I think I want you to look in the mirror. Look in the mirror and say this: I am loved. I am free. Jesus is my King. Jesus died on the cross for me. Jesus forgives me. Jesus is with me every step of the way. I get it's hard to believe, but did you ever give all of yourself to Jesus? That's what he's asking of us. When you and I give ourselves, and we just decide to go all in, not with chips at the gambling table, but our heart and our soul and our mind, and say, I don't want to live this way anymore, and I want to give all of myself to you, that's the start. Admit, believe that he can save you, and make the decision. And yet, please, this might also not be your last day. One day at a time is this deal. But we got to do it every day, every time, without fail, no exceptions. Give yourself to Jesus every day, every time, without fail, no exceptions. Recovery is one day at a time. I was in a hotel last night, and I had somebody come up to me, and I ran the other direction because it wasn't who I want to be. I've learned, because of one day at a time, to run away from those things, from the drug dealer, from the prostitute, from the person that's wanting to pull me down. I've learned you got to get out of there. Turn around and run. Get away. Jesus is with you. He's got you surrounded by an army of angels. But what Jesus also tells us is pray ceaselessly. Get holes in your carpet. Pray all the time. I'm going to give you a prayer. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Here's the prayer. It's a third step prayer. God, I offer myself to thee. Say that out loud. I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Say that out loud. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Take away my difficulties, whatever they may be, take them away. That victory over them may bear witness to those I would help. of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. If you're not a believer, and you can say this prayer, Jesus, I know you died on the cross for me. Say that. I know you died for me. I know that you died and 3 days later rose again. I know that you forgive my sins. You are the Savior, the one and only true God. And I know that because of the fact that I'm saying this prayer right now, that you have brought me by your side. I am saved. I am walking with you. I have forever life. In Jesus' name. I believe by you praying those two prayers that you are saved and you will be free, and now you got to do the work one day at a time.
Thank you very much. But now that you've led somebody to Christ, and now that you've prayed for somebody to pray for their addiction and all, I'll come back to you and say, if Jesus was standing here, or if I was Jesus, and you want to thank Jesus right now, what would you thank him for? And I mean that not in your successes, but also in